I'm sure by now you've heard about the changes in the federal budget for the capital gains inclusion rates. And I'm not here to complain about politics because what's the point? Can't do anything about it. And because you can't do anything about it, let's not complain. So here's how it's going to affect you, and here's what you should be doing in this episode.
Look, I get it. The Toronto real estate market is confusing. Whether you're a new or experienced investor or just looking for a home to raise your family in, join us at Broadview Table Talks as we sit around the table with my friends and talk about the real estate and the ever-changing market in Toronto.
Okay, let's first start off on explaining what a capital gain is. And if you already know this, then just bear with me. It's going to be really short. If you work a regular job, 100% of that income is actually included to your tax returns, and you get taxed at whatever your marginal rate is. At the highest bracket, over $246,000, it works out to 53.5%. If you are earning that as an asset, so say you invested into a stock, or you got that from your compensation from your company, or maybe even you bought real estate, then the amount you sell it for versus what you bought it for, that adjusted cost base can either decrease or increase depending on what you do with it, like meaning that it increases if you have expenses or decreases if you have depreciation. You got to recapture that. Anyway, long story short, that amount actually gets counted as income, but only half of that gets included into your income, and then you get taxed at your marginal rate. So hopefully that makes sense. The reason why the government does that is because investment capital can just move anywhere. It doesn't have to be stuck in Canada, unlike labor, where if you're a Canadian, you're going to be working in Canada most likely, and you're going to be working for a Canadian company. It's very unlikely that you're going to be living in Canada and working overseas for an overseas company, getting paid in overseas money, right? Or even moving out there and flying out there all the time. For the most part, I think the Canadian government has given investment income or capital gains preferred treatment because of that reason. And funny enough, a bit of history about it. In 1972 and before, capital gains wasn't even taxed at all, actually. So any kind of gain that you made, say you bought a car and you sold it at a higher price, you don't get taxed on that. Pretty cool. But then in 1998 to 1989, it was taxed at 66% or included at 66% as your income. From 1990 to 2000, it was included at 75%. And then from 2001 to right now, it was included at 50%. So let's go through a practical example. Assuming that you're at the highest bracket of income earners at $246,000, and that's your base anyway, you're gonna be paying 53.5% on anything you gain after that. If you're looking at the 50% inclusion rate, 53.5% of that amount works out to 26.7%. Of 66%, if you included that new rate after June 25th, 53.5 of that works out to 35%. If you minus the two, 35.3% minus 26.7%, you're looking at 8.5% as the net effect to your bottom line if you had a capital gain. Basically, your taxes will go up by 8.5%. If you're not at the highest bracket, say you make $100,000, then your marginal tax rate in Ontario will be 43.4%. So again, 43.4% of 50% inclusion rate will work out to 21.7%, and 43.4% of the new inclusion rate, 66%, that works out to 28.6%, meaning a net difference of 6.9%. So you're going to look at anywhere from 6 to 8.5% on additional new taxes if you were to dispose of an asset on June 25th and after. So what are the new rules? Well, basically, if you're an individual, you have an exemption up to $250,000. It'll still be included at 50%, like the old rules, like how it is currently today. But anything above $250,000 in that same calendar year will be included at 66%, the new rate. If you're a corporation, now this is where it kind of sucks, and there's plus and minuses of that. I'll get into a little more details later on. It actually gets included at 66% from the first penny, which is kind of annoying. But if you think about it, corporations, if the money was funded to that corporation, not using after-tax dollars, if you're using pre-tax income, then you had preferential treatment for that anyway. So that would have been taxed at 12.5% initially through a corporation. And if you're using that same corporation to buy again, then you're basically deferring that taxes anyway. So you kind of get that benefit, and it kind of makes sense. But it does suck. No one likes it. But again, we're not here to complain. We're here to know the rules, understand it, and learn how to deal with it. And you might ask, what if you own a property with a spouse, or say a sibling or a partner, investment partner that you bought as an individual? Well, each of you get that $250,000 exemption. So the first $250,000 is included at 50% for both of you. So combine that together. If both your names are on title on a property, or let's just say you, I don't know, for some reason you had a joint stock portfolio, it doesn't make sense. But let's just say you bought the property together and both of your names are on title. So then each of you get a $250,000 exemption. So total will be under $500,000. So in other words, you have to make more than $500,000 in a capital gain in a single year for this new inclusion rate to start affecting you. However, if you bought something with a partner where you have a corporation, then unfortunately all of that's going to be taxed at 66% or included at 66%. So the net result, again, will work out to 8.5% more additional taxes or less, depending on which income bracket you are for that year. Not a good thing, but again, we're not here to complain. We're here to work through the examples and see how this is going to affect you and how to plan better. The question I've been getting a lot is, do you have to dispose of the asset before June 25th, or does it mean that you just get a written agreement before June 25th if you want to stay in the old inclusion rates? Well, the answer is that in capital gains, it's when you dispose of the asset and when you actually realize the gains. So it actually means you have to sell and close before June 25th, or meaning June 24th. And as you can realize in real estate, that's not very practical. If you had a stock portfolio and you want to do that, just get rid of all your stocks and pay the capital gains now because you knew you were going to do it anyway, then you might as well do it. But I would encourage you to think twice about this situation. So the reason why I want you to think twice about it is because, nobody likes paying more taxes, but the net result, again, is only 8.5% or potentially less if you're in a lower tax bracket. If it's up to 8.5%, and let's just say you weren't going to dispose of the asset anyway, you weren't going to sell that real estate, you were going to hold in your company stock for, foreseeable future, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that 8.5%, could you not make more on that if you held that asset and it just appreciated? In the past, we've seen real estate appreciate at 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20% year over year. And we've hit a low for the past few years. And when interest rates start dropping, potentially it's estimated that this year we're going to see 10% gains. I mean, I don't know if it's true, don't hold me that. It's not investment advice. But ultimately, if it gains 10% and you got to pay another 8.5% in disposing the asset and you weren't planning to sell it anyway, well, think about that, right? Maybe you just want to hold on to the asset instead. There are some other scenarios where this would affect you, such as an inheritance, or you want to sell investment property or a family cottage. Depends how you hold the property or how you're going to be accumulating the property. If it's an inheritance and it goes to your personal name, well, that first $250,000 will be included at the old rate or the current rate of 50%. Anything above $250,000, say it's paid off, say you inherited a house from your family member. I'm sorry to hear that you inherited a house. I mean, it's great that you did that, but it's just unfortunate you lost somebody. If you were to get that amount, say it's $1 million, or property worth $1 million, a cottage worth $1 million, just to say, then the first $250,000 would be included at 50% of your income, and then you got to pay the remaining $750,000 at 66% included into your income. So that can be a significant amount. So if you're thinking about leaving behind some property to your future generations, or if somebody is listening to this, consider getting life insurance. I mean, that's my strategy. It's not for everyone, but it's just what I did. I have a whole life policy that will pay out my beneficiaries, including the asset that they get. So that tax burden of that asset is offset by the benefits of the life insurance when I pass. That's a good strategy. I think it works for me. I know there's other more creative strategies, but that's a pretty basic strategy that most people buy life insurance for. Consider it. Now, if you are selling a cottage or investment property, then unfortunately it does affect you if it's held under a personal name. The first $250,000 will be included at 50%. Anything after $250,000 would be 66%. If you have a spouse or two people in title, then perhaps it works out to $500,000 as a first exemption. Now, I've heard of stories where you can actually realize the gain now by transferring a property from, let's just say, a corporation to a partnership, or individuals, even for that matter, under individual names. The problem with properties is that you got to pay your land transfer taxes. And then on top of that, so for switching it from a corporation to either a partnership or personal name, you're paying that land transfer tax, which could be pretty significant. And then you got to deal with mortgage situations, so the banks might not like that. But if you have the property personally guaranteed through the corporation anyway, then maybe that might be a situation for you. Maybe you could say that you held it in trust. Again, speak with your accountant or tax lawyer for those specific fine details. But there are situations where you do want to realize the gains now. And I've seen situations where if you're transferring spouse to spouse, then you're not paying capital gains, and they're not triggering that. And I'm sorry, you're not paying land transfer taxes. You're not triggering land transfer taxes. And potentially you can transfer it to your spouse, but I guess it depends on what you transfer it for. So if you're transferring it for the original cost base, the original purchase price is the cost base, then there's no capital gains to be had. Now you're under someone else's name, right? Which is kind of cool. And then the following year, when you actually have to do your taxes, you can choose whether or not you want to include it at the current purchase price, the original purchase price you bought it at, or the new gain that you got it at, right? And then you could choose whether you want to pay the taxes then. That's just one way to mitigate it. If you're confused by that, again, reach out to your tax professional. There's a bit of tax planning you can do, but for the most part, it's actually not that bad of a change. I don't like it again, and I think it's going to discourage a lot of people from investing into Canada. There's going to be some sort of ramifications of this. It's just like this actual capital gains inclusion tax isn't going to make that much of a difference to you. I mean, 8.5% difference, you can, like, it's an asset, it appreciates in value. You'll probably make that up in a year anyway. But it's just the final straw that broke the camel's back. You know what I mean? It's just that extra little thing that just says, we pay way too many taxes in Canada. Like, what's it all for? What it actually is for is that the government, they're starting to use this tax money to make it fair for other generations, right? Which, in my opinion, it's unfair for everybody. It is what it is. Generally, older, like the boomer generation, is one with the assets, because we've seen a big run up in asset prices over the past 2-3 decades. And for the new people trying to get into the asset market, whether it's buying stocks or buying, real estate or whatever it is, they're having a hard time saving up for that down payment. So they're trying to say it's fairness for every other generation. You're taxing the boomers and you're giving it to the millennials. And the government is starting to do these new programs, which in my opinion is not going to make a difference, and it's just more spending, which I don't like it. But again, not going to get political here. So these new spending measures include, it's basically $53 billion over the next 5 years, which that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. I don't know what they're doing, but it's a lot of money. Within that budget, 2024 to 25, the deficit's going to be projected to be close to $40 billion. For context, it's a big money, but it's only 1.3% of the economy, which is still a lot of money. I just don't understand why we can't have a balanced book or even head towards having balanced budgets. Like, just spend what you make. Like, simple as that. Don't just continue to print more money. It just creates more inflation, and it's going to end up helping the asset owners to begin with anyway, right? Because it's not the value of your home or your asset actually goes up in price. It only goes up in price because the value of the dollar decreases. I hope you realize that. I'm sure you realize that. If you're watching this channel, you're pretty smart, I'm sure. So there's a couple things, like they're putting money into this whole building rental housing, apartment construction loan program. That's all through CMHC. And that's good for apartment building owners or people that are in the apartment space to create more housing. Fine, I get that, because I get to benefit from that. I like that too. There's also some rental protection fund, which, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me with this whole administering, seeing what the past rentals went for. Like, how's that going to help anything? Just because you know what the past rental went for, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get that rate. Like, who cares? You can see that on, if you have anything on MLS, you can see it on any of the apps. You can see what the place rented for in the past. I don't get it. The credit card thing, or the credit report thing, where tenants can now report their credit. Well, it's good and bad. I mean, if you're defaulting your credit, then you're going to get hit on your credit, which, it kind of exists now if you want to opt into reporting. But chances are you're not, that's not your only bill that's going to affect your credit. Like, you still have credit card payments and maybe even line of credits or even a car payment. So I just don't see how it's going to benefit. What's going to happen is that the government's spending a ton of money on administering these new programs. And instead of just increasing the taxes, maybe spend less. Again, I'm getting into political views. Let's try not to do that for this whole new 30-year amortization for first-time home buyers. Doesn't make sense to me. It helps a very, very, very small percentage of the population, because first of all, it's only on new homes. It has to be CMHC insured, which means it has to be under $1 million, and you have to be a first-time home buyer. So how many of those people are there out there? First of all, how many projects allow you to put less than 20% down as a new construction project? Maybe some tail end of some existing inventory that are under $1 million. Sure, maybe. So maybe it's helping boost them up a little bit, and the builder lobbyists were successful in getting that program pushed through. But it just doesn't make sense to me, and it's going to affect a very small percentage of the population. Most builders at new construction want you to put more than 20% down. And, that's not to say that you can even afford it. Like, the payments will be astronomical because the interest rates are so high. So stretching it by 30 years, another 5 years from it now, it doesn't make sense. What I meant to say was that anybody that's not in that program, anybody that's not a first-time home buyer, that's not CMHC funded, you can get 30-year amortizations right now anyway. So really, it's just a political win-win for them. I mean, they get to win. The lobbyists, the builder developers that are trying to sell some remaining inventory to first-time home buyers, maybe they get to win as well too. But for the general population, it makes zero change at all. This whole new fairness for every generation thing is supposed to apparently only target 40,000 people in Canada. And it's supposed to bring another $220 billion in additional revenue of the $53 billion that they chose to spend over the next 5 years. So why don't they just tighten their belt a little bit? But anyway, I'm not a policymaker, so whatever. It is what it is. We're dealing with it now. I don't think it's only 40,000 people. I think it's a lot more, because how many mom and pops, individual people, regular people like you and I, how many of us actually have our investments in corporations? I mean, there's a lot of us, right? So I think that policy should have changed. I get why they did it, because if it's corporate money, then in theory, that would have been tax deferred to begin with anyway, right? Meaning that you're not paying the full 100% of income taxes like you would in a normal job, because it's money that was earned in a corporation that's going to be continued and invested in corporation. So I guess that there is a benefit, and they need money at the end of the day. So that's all it is. So how can you plan for it? I think I went through some of them. At the end of the day, the message is that it's not the end of the world by having to pay more of these capital gains inclusions in your taxes. It sucks, but it shouldn't change your plans, and you shouldn't rush out there and make drastic decisions. Talk to your tax professional to see if there's any ways to mitigate that ahead of time. And if you want anything to deal with real estate advice, then make sure you call me. Make sure you schedule an appointment below. With that, I'm happy to talk to you next week, and I guess I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.
Add it up.
Thanks for sticking out to the very end. I hope you got some value out of this. Do me a favor, please press like and subscribe, but more than anything, leave me some feedback so we know what to produce for you going forward. Thanks again.